Welcome to the Taylor Made Tasty podcast. I'm Taylor, retired serial quitter turned goal boss coach, speaker, and consultant. I believe a beautiful life starts with a beautiful mindset. Join me as we amplify confidence, resilience, and actionable tools on the road to quit quitting on you and your vision. You are worthy of your goals, so let's go get there. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Taylor Made Tasty, the podcast. I really want this episode to come from a place of positivity because that is what my Oma left on my life and my heart. But this also is very fresh, and so if I feel the feelings, I'm just going to honor them. But one of the first things that my husband and I actually bonded about when we were dating was that there were often times throughout our childhood that growing up, we would have periods of time where we lived with our grandparents. And that wasn't necessarily normal for kids back then. So it was like this weirdness of why do we live with our grandparents when other kids don't live with their grandparents, and how we look at it now, and it feels so special and unique that we got that time with them. And I remember growing up, I would brag about my sets of grandparents. So I was lucky enough to have 4 sets of grandparents. So I have my mom's parents, my dad's parents, and then my bonus mom also had a bonus mom. So she had 2 sets of family. So I had 4 sets of grandparents growing up. And I used to brag because there were 4 of them and they were all alive. And that was, even at my age growing up, that was pretty rare for everyone to have all of their grandparents and all of them to be alive. And so that was just something that felt so special, that I had this expansive reach of family and they were all still around and alive. And that is no longer the case. Unfortunately, I've lost quite a few of them. My guardian angel gang up there is getting thick, and it's real sad. It's real sad. So, but today I really wanted to focus on talking about my Oma. And if you don't know what an Oma is grandma in German. And so on my mom's side, they were all born in Germany, came over here when my mom was super young. And so they have lived here ever since. But every single one of my family on my mom's side was born there. And so I grew up with an Oma and an Opa. And that is who I lived with some of the time when, with my mom too, but just that we would have situations or reasonings that we would need to live with them. And that was such a blessing that I now realize, because I just had so much time with them that, you don't necessarily get if you haven't ever lived with your grandparents or you haven't lived close to your grandparents. Like with my Opa, I don't really remember this, but my mom tells a story that I used to drag this like little plastic chair, the ones that were kind of like in front of the stores at grocery stores, just those little kid plastic chairs, and drag it in front of him, and he would brush my hair while we were watching TV. Or I would avoid bath time like the plague, and I used to run around the house naked. And my Oma, to this day, I still say the same phrase. She would say, "Naki froshi, naki froshi," and I was like running around the house trying to avoid bath time, and that is German for naked frog. So even now, if I'm like being silly with my husband or he's being silly, we'll say like "Naki froshi." And it's just such a sweet memory. And there are so many of them. I could go truly on and on about the impact that both my Oma and Opa have had on me. But this past week, I lost my Oma. And on January 31st, I remember where I was sitting in this exact seat that I'm sitting right now in my office and hearing a scream from the other room. And my mom came into my office, and the news was that my Oma was diagnosed with leukemia, which is fairly rare in elderly people, as I understand it. Over the last 8 months, she had weekly blood and platelets, and she was actually given a grant that helped the family out in securing her a few rounds of chemo. And this was unlike conventional chemo. These are actually pills, and the side effects are fairly mild in this case, which is such a blessing. And with leukemia, the other piece of that is that there's not really a lot of pain involved. It's more or less your body is shutting down because it is not getting the blood oxygen, and like all of her levels would go down over time, and that's why she needed the blood and needed the platelets. And a lot of this was, and we knew this going into it, that there was really no cure, but we were prolonging her life and we were getting more time with her. And she would have really good days, good weeks even, and bad days. And most of the year, there was a lot of moments where it was panic, like it's coming. And then there would be a reason why, the end wasn't near. Whether we got poor information from the doctor, or it just, her body doing a shift and then kind of coming back from it. And I just really never felt called to talk about this in a public space. I know I share a lot of my life on Instagram, but this was deep, and this was near and dear to my heart, and just not something that I felt like I could talk about in this space. But she started to become more and more lethargic and sleeping a lot of the day. And over the last 2 years, my uncle has a large property in Central California, and he had been building an apartment for them on his property. And it has taken multiple years just because of COVID and everything, with materials and permits and you name it, it happened. And so about a month ago, they got to finally move into the property, which is like so beautiful and open, and there's family right next door and doggies and just all the things around them. And in changing hospitals and doctors, it was decided with the family as well that the chemo pills, because of her levels declining, the chemo pills would be suspended. And shortly after that, also the blood and platelets were suspended. And it's just that her numbers were no longer being affected. And it really was, if we had continued to choose to do that, my mom and my uncles and my Opa, it would have been coming from a very selfish place. And the quality of life had declined really in the past month to 2 months. So my mom flew out there about 3 weeks ago to a month, and I would say about a week and a half to 2 weeks is when we really saw it, because we were FaceTiming, and I could just see the decline in Oma. We had been there not even 2 months ago, almost 2 months to the day prior to my half marathon, and Dustin and I were able to play cards with her and laugh and just like exchange stories, as Oma and Opa do. They're such good storytellers. And so that was really special. That was the last time that we were able to hang out with them. And once Peyton returned to California and I returned from a trip to Wyoming, we immediately headed to see them in Central California. And truly the only stops we made were gas, food, restrooms, and once in Tucson for an hour and a half nap. It's a 22-hour drive without stops. So you put, food, gas, restrooms, all of that in there. It's going to be much longer. But this was really the way that it made the most sense because we had to consider Montana. We had to consider that the closest airport to them is more of a regional airport, and it's just really hard to get to without, there's no way to get there without any layovers, or if you go to a different airport, then somebody nearby has to do a 6-hour round trip to come get you. So this made the most sense, and we had full control over timing, or so we thought. And I was on a Zoom call because I was still working my business while I was on this drive, and my mom called me, and I texted her back, and I asked her if it was urgent, and she said yes. And at this point, we were about 4.5 hours out from being at Oma's bedside. So we had been driving at this point we had been on the road for about 23 hours, and we still had another 4.5 hours to go before we were at Oma's bedside. And I knew when my mom said yes. And so I tell the girls that are on the Zoom I have to go, and I get on the phone and I can hear it in the first words that she says. And I've received a phone call like this more times than I'd like to admit, and it just really doesn't get any easier when you receive that phone call and you hear the tone of the other person's voice and you just know. And so in that moment, all I thought about was how I fucked up and I didn't get there on time and I didn't get to say goodbye to her, and feeling all of those really selfish thoughts, honestly, because the point is that she was peaceful and that it wasn't. There's 2 points to it, actually, and Dustin made a really good one, is that she had been, from a mental standpoint, not really there either. So there was no reason for her to be scared because there was almost no awareness of what was happening. And then the fact that this leukemia in particular is more of just a shutdown. It's almost as if she goes to sleep and that's that. So the fact that it's peaceful and fairly painless and all of that is what more could you ask for, right? It wasn't some traumatic accident or something like that where there's so many questions and things, and the idea, I think what makes me the most sad when I think about the other people that I've lost is them being scared, them being aware of what's happening and being scared and not being able to control it and unsure of what they're going to feel and how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen, right? Where, again, the point here is that it was very peaceful, and that the day before even, my family was trying to comfort me and say that it was bad the day before, and that I was blessed that the last alive interaction that I had with her was one where we were playing cards and laughing and really enjoying our time together. So I was a mess. This was the longest drive. It just was never ending. We're going into Central California, which is wine country, on a Friday, and it just felt like we were never going to get there. And one of the questions that I asked before I got off the phone was to see if my mom could figure out a way to keep Oma there so that I could say goodbye to her and to keep her body there. And they absolutely did. The mortuary was like kind of on our timeline, and they came in and they dressed her and took out her catheter and like bathed her in a lavender oil, and she just looked so peaceful and beautiful, and her hands were folded over her like lower stomach, and she was just beautiful. And so I was able to take that moment with her and really tell her everything that she had meant to me and the imprint that she's left on my life and my husband's life and Peyton's life and really everybody in the family. And I was able to tell her stories that were my absolute favorite, some of which I've written about, but like her reach, I said her roots run deep and her branches run wide, because she really had that big of a reach, whether you met her once or you were part of her family. She just always had such a caring, considerate, kind, just beautiful way about her. And one of the examples of that is they used to come every year on Grandparents' Day, and whether my friends or anyone around didn't have a grandparent or their grandparent wasn't able to come that day, you know, Alma was always one of the ones that was like, let me adopt you. And they took pictures at Grandparents' Day, and so we would take pictures as like the full group of everybody that was adopted by my Oma and Opa that day, and then I was able to get my own photo with them too. But that just is like an example of what I mean by her reach. And she was always so proud of being German, loud and proud, always doing something German, whether she was like singing, dancing, cooking, and she always wanted everyone around her to like be as excited as she was about her culture and either taste it or hear it or learn something about it, right? And the food was just constant. I mean, I can remember days where I would where if my Oma and Opa happened to be the ones that were picking me up that day, I would have a full lunch after school. So even though I had lunch at school, when I got picked up, I had a full meal waiting for me in the back of the car, like I was starving all day at school, like a whole ass other lunch. And I can remember the type of bread she used to use and the meat she used, and always like lettuce and tomato on there. And I can just like picture it and almost taste it with like the way that she used to make these sandwiches. But I do absolutely think she is part of the reason that I am such a foodie, is that she's always trying to feed us and keep us happy. And I remember that one of the most special times growing up was Christmas Eve. We, in like German culture, Christmas Eve is kind of a bigger deal than Christmas Day. And so everyone would be at their house, the house that I was able to partially grow up in. And everyone would be there, and they would take all the cousins, so all of their grandkids, they would put them in the back room and then almost pretend like you could hear Santa Claus like on the house, and then all of a sudden when you walked out, like all these presents are sitting in the front room with the Christmas tree and everything. And so those were just like really special moments, and I just remember she was so excited to love on her grandkids, like just so excited to be there and see them happy and make them happy. And she lived her life for that. Like, it was so beautiful to see. And I think I started to only really understand the complexity of my Oma as I got older. Like, very dynamic, very complex. She was a grade A worrywart to the core, but also somehow had this like free spirit type soul too, where she had just like this zest for life. Like I said, she was obsessed with her grandkids, and she was always like wanting to dance or sing, and she really had this like beautiful free spirit zest for life, where also she was really scared of things, and scared if, you know, someone was hurt or someone would get hurt, or you know, you're gonna get a cold, or if you did have a cold, she would do every German remedy in the book to like make sure that you got better as soon as possible. She would worry about you and love on you in the same breath at the same degree. And I guess part of that comes through as she never drove, like had no license. So she never drove anywhere. If she went anywhere, she was either driven by Opa or somebody else, or she would walk there. And I remember as a kid, I would be like so over this, like, Oma, why are we walking I'm telling you, miles to the grocery store and then miles back to the house carrying all these groceries? And she did not have that normal, like, grandma goes to the grocery store cart. Like, we were carrying paper bags back to the house, walking miles back to the house with all these groceries. But she, for years, would walk to work, if she wanted to go anywhere while no one was able to take her, she was walking there. But she would also be really scared of, like, if a dog was going to come out and bite or something like that. So again, like, very dynamic of this sort of badass that's like willing to be independent and do things in that way, but also like wouldn't drive a car, right? But she did love Harleys, which is so interesting and random. And for one of her milestone birthdays, my mom secured a family friend that was able to take her around town riding on the back of a Harley. So she had a little leather jacket on, and she put the bandana on her head like bikers do, and got on the back of that Harley like it was nothing. Just, again, this sort of fearlessness, this like free spirit, zesty life that she wanted to live and like ride free. And she got on the back of that thing, and it was so cool because all of us were in different cars and following her, and it was like this motorcade surrounding her in this Harley and taking pictures and video as she's just has the biggest smile on her face. Is so beautiful. And I think one of my favorite, more simple things about her is every time she said goodbye. So she would come out of the house, stand on the side of the sidewalk or the street or wherever she was, and she would wave in her specific Oma wave, and she would wave you all the way down the street. Till you didn't know she could still be waving when you turned, but she would not turn around until you were off of that street. And same kind of concept to getting off the phone as well. She would say goodbye forever, goodbye, I love you, goodbye, I love you. And more or less in the later years, Oppo would just get over it and end up clicking the phone because he was like, okay, you already said goodbye. We said goodbye about 10 times. We're good now. And we're about a week out, maybe less than that now, of their 66th wedding anniversary. I have really, for many, many years now, called my Oma and Opa my soulmates. Because I truly feel that you can have soulmates that don't have to be your romantic love. That there are different people in this life, in this world, that can complete you in many different ways. And my Oma and Opa did that. They did that for me, and they did that for my mom. And they just lived their life for the people around them and supported them in any way that they could. And, you know, Tony Robbins has this thing where he talks about your parents and which one you try to impress more when you're growing up. But the point of that whole segment is that your parents do the best they got with what they have. And I think growing up with my mom and my uncles, that my Oma and Opa did the best they got with what they had at that time. And I think they learned a lot from being parents that made them even better grandparents. And they have opened up so much more, and they have lived a joyous life so much more. And all of the things that they saw in Germany and during the war, and that they've experienced, like bullets going through their houses and things that we can never imagine that they saw in their childhood, that had an effect on how they lived their own lives and how they parented. And all of that, I think, came out more and more as they became grandparents, because there were stories that, they wanted to tell their grandkids, and there was just like so much love around that you couldn't deny to just be a little bit softer with so much love. And one of the things that happened over the weekend, after, when we were all together and just sitting around and talking to Dustin, it's like, look at what Oma and Opa did. Look at what they built by being them and their kids, and then their grandkids and their great grandkids. Like, look at what they built. And just to take a moment to look around at, like I said, their deep roots and their robust branches that were all surrounded and all around for this time, was really beautiful. And when I think of my Oma, when I think of, let's say, grandma in general, I think warm and fuzzy. And I do want to acknowledge that that's not the case for everybody. But I think the idea of a grandma being warm and fuzzy is like this really beautiful concept. And that is the feeling that my Oma would exude to everybody she met. And you never felt like a stranger around her. And I hope to keep that same energy in all I do in my life and my business. But for now, part of my heart is missing. All right, y'all, it is time for the quote of the episode. And this quote is about 1 out of 5 phrases that I know how to say in German. So I already told you how to say naked frog, Naki Froshi. So the next time you're running around naked in front of somebody, you can be like, Naki Froshi. So you're welcome for that. But I would always love saying this certain phrase to my Oma, because she was really proud that I knew like one German phrase, like knew some German. And it means you are beautiful. Du bist so hübsch, Oma. So take that into your week, your month, maybe even your year, and know that you are beautiful. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in my community. I'm so glad you showed up today, and let's go get there. Look at you, crushing it. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Tailor Made Tasty podcast. My hope is you always leave with a takeaway to implement in your own goal-crushing journey. I would love if you could take a moment to leave a review. And if you're looking for a community of goal boss badasses just like you, be sure to check out tailormadetasty.com/membership.